But we've also seen it when we look at the pictures of those people on the front lines. Do you know 80% of all healthcare workers in America are women? And 1 out of 3 jobs held by women in our country has been classified as essential. So this is an issue that affects all of us, young and old, every kind of background from every walk of life. But we've also seen it when we look at the...
Oh, God, that is so fucking funny. I swear to God, that is the funniest thing I've seen all day. Believe it or not, Hillary Clinton in that moment is endorsing Joe Biden as Joe Biden falls asleep during the endorsement. Think about that. We had JFK, FDR, Joe Biden falling asleep during an endorsement by the previous runner. Wow. That's just stunning, right? And that's not disqualifying. Blue no matter who. That's not disqualifying. Blue no matter who. I know this title for this video is somewhat provocative. What does somebody wear to kill God? But I was enamored by it. I couldn't get away from it. So I was like, hey, fuck it. Let's have a 420. And let's get into the finger trap, the scam that has been pulled over the American public, if we're being honest, by the political parties, especially the Democratic Party. First, the what do you wear to kill God? Oh, I love that. I love that. I love that on so many levels. So in one part, the person who's asking that, he has a conception of the outside world. And with that conception of the outside world, he's thinking to himself, badassery. He's looking for badassery. Now, in looking for badassery, it's a subjective. That idea of it is going to bounce against societies in an affirmative way or counter way. It doesn't really matter which way. I mean, the whole culture thing is just an artifact. All that I'm making the point that it bounces against a self-conception of reality. It's so weird. On the other side of that, and again, it is badassery. The person who we're talking about has made the choice to wage war with some ethereal being. And the only thing that they're asking you is, what do you wear? They made the choice to kill God. Or at the very least, something that they think is God. How do you know it's God? Am I going to blink out of existence when you do that? How do you know that? Is that the entire point of you trying to do that? Like, that's a fascinating fucking concept. Even if millions of people made that choice, it's God. I mean, we quibble over issues of whether or not to kill people here, one individual. And we're talking about the concept of God. I was fascinated by that. Beyond that point, maybe it's not God in the proper sense of a ethereal being out there that has some level of an identity. And I even consider, what if the person actually really does want to know what to wear to kill God? I would say get away from that person, because he would just as soon as slit your throat and eat his cereal after it's as your body pretty much lays there and writhes, wiggling. I mean, if his concerns is basically, hey, what am I supposed to wear? Meaning the question is rhetorical when the person is asking it. There's a certain cheeky, bravado about it associated with it. And maybe it's not cheeky at all. The bravado is all out there because the provocativeness of it, kill God. I don't know. I loved it. I started thinking of it in terms of what if it's a system, not necessarily something that has an identity, but a faceless, impersonal, absolute force of being in a way, even if that's through incentives. but force of being, meaning whatever you want, God has a will of its own, and God can enforce that will through punishment and vengeance. Now, what if I take that allegory and put it towards the Democratic Party? And yes, I know it's a bit of a stretch, and I know that's a lot of water to drink for that, but I really like the kill God thing. I think it's so badass for some reason. Maybe we have a really sick, fucked up society to be like, yeah, that's really badass. What do you wear in that situation? It's like, I'm wearing my Pac-Man. I'm wearing my Pac-Man shirt. I'm wearing my Pac-Man shirt to kill God. I'm wearing the shirt just to show God that I can wear this diminutive thing as I trample all of creation. That is kind of badass, wearing a Pac-Man shirt to kill God. But let's look at this in the sense of our elections. Are you trapped to vote for Joe Biden? And if so, why? Is it not almost the impersonal, absolute will of God of sorts that almost compels you to do that? And it's been doing that year after year after year after year. Otherwise, you would have voted for the Green Party, or you would have voted for some other party, or maybe you would have stayed home. I would wager that in one election after the next, whether it was Romney, whether it was Bob fucking Dole, who would be a Democrat today, everybody was terrified of, there was a boogeyman. And each election was the greatest thing ever, with specific focus on the election to the exclusion of everything else. And every 4 years, same thing. They would tell you, hey, I would help you with with your third party stuff, but you gotta vote for the Democrat. And this blue no matter who, man. We gotta keep the Republicans. We gotta get the Supreme Court. Gotta get the Supreme Court. And then the next 4 years, same thing. Narrow focus pragmatism. Never looking at the arc of time, where you see, wow, they got worse. They got really right-wing for a reason. It's you. It's because of you. There was nothing objective about what it was to be a Democrat. You basically had a party that was relative to the Republican Party. The moment that the premise of blue no matter who was accepted, anything went. Bill Clinton could privatize Social Security. Bill Clinton, NAFTA, gutting of welfare, Glass-Steagall. I mean, a right-wing Republican would have been great. They would have been enamored to get that much stuff done. But because Bill Clinton was a Democrat, he had cover to do that stuff. So people said, well, he's a Democrat. Well, fair game. That stuff was atrocious. The outcomes was atrocious. The financial crash that we suffered in 2008 was to some degree a result of Bill Clinton's deregulation frenzy. I guess I'm making the point that part and parcel to the reason your candidates suck, that your politicians suck, is because all notions of accountability was taken off the table. Now, that wasn't taken off the table for magic, right? Republicans are pretty fucking heinous. And if you're an African American, looking at the Klansmen riding into crowds and looking at the Republican president, white nationalists, nakedly at this point, going from location to location of African American atrocities, places where there were massacres of us. And he's deciding to troll on this. That's more grotesque than I thought Trump had in him, if I'm being honest. And I thought he was a lowlife. And that takes it to that much of an nth degree of a low-lifedness. So I understand this notion of, keep the monsters at bay. But that's the catch, right? This is kind of what I mean by impersonal. It's the metrics of it. It's the mechanics of it. The incentive structure that's built into it is forced in some degree to compel you to eat shit and vote for the Democrat who you don't want. You would prefer that guy. You would prefer those policies. And yet you continuously get stuck with this dinosaur. You had a socialist running this race that was pushing for Medicare for all, that was pushing for an extension of Social Security, elimination of all student debt. And why not? We allow people to go to school for public school. We don't charge them to go to public school. It's open to anybody. I don't care if a rich person gets a payoff. They pay their taxes also. They're citizens of this country just like anybody else. They're not like aliens or something. They should reap the benefits of any particular public plan just like anybody else. Get rid of this other stuff. The reason that they use that means testing is to exclude. How do you justify having a let's say $10,000 price limit, and the person that makes $115,000 who is in the same boat as the guy with $110,000, how do you justify that? And clearly, that person who makes $115,000, who can't afford to pay for their kid to go to school, would be righteously indignant and angry about that, and may even be against that program for that very specific reason. You're creating tension where none needs to be. And it's a bullshit excuse to say, okay, well, we're going to means test. You realize that if somebody was a millionaire, they would pay for their kids to go to a school and may not necessarily want those kids to go to public school or state school anyway. It's a BS excuse in order to exclude various members from the program. My point is, Joe Biden represents none of the policies that Sanders won on. And the question, honestly, like I said before, that really needs to be asked every time Joe Biden gets in front of a mic, because I think it's the question and the only one that really matters. For all of you Democrats, all of you liberals that have all sorts of consternation about whether or not Joe Biden can beat Donald Trump is doing a pretty good fucking job of basically beating himself. But who knows what happens at the debates? Maybe the COVID thing flip around much faster than any sane, rational, reasonable person would think. But if you really wanted to put the nail in the coffin, it's straightforward. If you want those Bernie voters, it's not magic, straightforward. Basic question should be asked every time they get in front of a mic. How do you justify not supporting Medicare for all when it has 88% of Democrat support and 70% of support from the rest of the public? How do you justify not supporting elimination of all student debt? Public universities free of charge, just like public universities. Your society changes, and as that society changes and grows and the needs of that society expands, your government needs to be able to attune to that. Free public school would be one of those ways of doing so. How do you justify not supporting that when the majority of the population supports that? How do you justify not supporting a wealth tax when the majority of the population supports that? How do you justify? Go down the list. Every policy that the public supports, ask him, why don't you support that? And how do you justify not supporting that if that is the difference between beating Donald Trump, who you consider to be a walking apocalypse? After all, Hillary Clinton, every Democrat, has made the point that Donald Trump has horns and has a tail, and that he kicks babies and peas in corn syrup when he gets the opportunity and goes to those like Pepsi places. He's a monster. He's apocalyptic. He's going to destroy democracy itself. This is what they tell us about Donald Trump. And yet, we will not support those policies that the American public wants. How do you justify that? You need to explain that in rational, coherent terms. Nancy Pelosi, Joe Biden, instead of bitching about Bernie Sanders voters, you need to answer, how do you justify not supporting policies like Medicare for all and the elimination of all student debt, if that would unify the party in order to beat Donald Trump? If indeed he is the walking apocalypse, don't you have to give a little bit to get a lot? Not to mention the fact that the public is on board for it, you are on the wrong side of the issue. And nobody asked that. Nobody asked that. I am going to show you how to slay God. That's what I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you how to slay the machine itself. Welcome. Early morning, 420, Soapbox. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, like, share, subscribe. You can always support PayPal, Patreon. What I'm laughing at is that I try to keep my time concise in the beginning of the video. That often doesn't necessarily work. And there are times where the long intro is longer than the end part. Luca Clemente pointed out, he says, welcome to the Progressive Soapbox, with the beginning of the video is longer than the end of the video. Yes, Luca, this is going to probably be one of those videos. How to slay the machine. How do you slay God? The thing is, there's no magical door. You must start at basically the mechanism, the way to which that particular function works. What is the scam? How does the Chinese finger trap actually do what it does? How did it get us to voting for this horrible policies that we don't necessarily want, especially from the standpoint of lefties, year after year after year after year, over and over and over and over again, where lefties will lump themselves in with Democrats to get nothing in return for it. And yet, you're stuck in a system where, as it gets worse, Democrats get more out of it. Isn't that fucked up? Think about it. As Democrats move to the right, the Republicans move to the right. They don't have this notion of agreement. Like I said, Ronald Reagan at this point, who everybody thought was the end of the world, is a Democrat, moderate Democrat at that. Obama himself has said, I would have been a Republican if it was, let's say, in the 80s. But, great. Party has moved so far to the right. Whew! I can call myself a Democrat and do hope and change thing. I hope you understand what I mean. Your specific, narrow-focused pragmatism misses that over the context of time, these people just get worse. Now, to the credit of the individual, again, I get it in the moment. But the problem is, as it goes through and as they get worse, Democrats are able to reap more cash because, again, what Clinton was raising like $1 billion, Obama was raising $1 billion. The money gets more and more and more, and their policies were incrementalists. Well, yeah, they're going to be incrementalists because they don't want to trespass on their donors. 90% of the races are won by the side with the most cash. And beyond trespassing on their donors, they spend like 70% of their time begging for cash. Now, you have dollars or pitchforks. People don't have time to have pitchforks. So the only thing you have is dollars. And the moment you accept blue, no matter who, trails to the right. As it trails to the right, the Republicans move further to the right, meaning they get more grotesque as the Democrats move to the right. Now, the Democrats are able to accept more money. They're going to continue to be incrementalists. The margin of difference between the two parties gets more narrow. But you get a Ted Cruz-like figure or Donald Trump-like figure. These figures are utterly grotesque. Or what's the other guy who wrote that? Tom Cotton. Oh, God, can you imagine those figures running? Even a Mike Pence, a religious maniac. And the Democrat would say, that guy's a monster. Now, the catch here is that guy's a monster in some part because of the Democratic Party itself. Meaning, as they move to the right, Republicans get that much worse. And they can make that argument that much more ferociously of, you clearly have to vote for me. That guy's a monster. Yeah, but that guy's a monster because you moved so far to the fucking right. You intentionally got that guy to be a monster. You guys have this kind of kumbaya thing going on, this symbiosis thing where you've just locked up the electorate, where you've stuck them into this trap. That needs to be broken. That edifice, that entire edifice needs to be torn down. Because consider for the moment that you can get nothing accomplished in your government while this works in the way it works. Nothing. Every policy that you found was popular. Medicare for all, elimination of all student debt, expansion of Social Security, wealth tax, a $15 an hour minimum wage. The American public says, and then they voted for Biden. Why? Because African Americans look at it, who keeps the monsters at bay? And in this case, Biden, they know him with Obama. He lies constantly about civil rights. And despite that, the African Americans, I think, look at him and say, he is what white America would accept. Now, as they looked at Sanders, they thought, okay, but he's risky. Missing the point that they keep saying this. Al Gore lost. John Kerry lost. In fact, John Kerry lost badly. I was looking at his vote totals that were so low. Hillary Clinton lost. These creatures lost. Those were the moderates. The one that won was the African American with a Muslim name that ran on hope and change, because he understood that the public wanted something fundamentally different than what the public had. Our memories are short on that stuff. And from the standpoint of media and propaganda and everything else, Joe Biden is the normal, or he's the default candidate. Here's the catch. Whatever you want to do in regards to voter shaming people, whatever you want to do in regards to making this case that people should vote for Joe Biden, or Joe Biden is the one that people should vote for and everything else, fact of the matter is you bleed off voters because what you do is so marginal. Read this. The Pew data on this is stark. Almost half of the non-voters in 2016 presidential election were non-white, even though they compose only 1/4 of the voting population. Think about that. Nearly half of the people that didn't vote were people of color, even though it's only 1/5 of them in the population. Oh, I'm sorry, 1/4 of them in the population. That's an astonishing number. It gets worse. Even more extreme is the data on class. More than half of the non-voters, 56%, are poor, making less than $30,000 a year. Those would be Democratic voters. Those Democratic voters basically said, I get nothing out of this process from supporting them. There's no transaction. What I want and what I need is basically assistance. I need some level of policy that makes my life better. And that is not what I'm getting from the political device. So I am not going to put my energies into that, of playing that game. On to one last point about that. You break the edifice by basically attacking at where it's structured. Right now, you have millions of people still marching in the streets. Those millions of people, on some level, need to get a political identity, and they need to get it fast. They have made a clear demand for defund the police, and even though I think that demand is diminutive, even though I think the political phrasing of it is problematic, I think this, to some degree, is a bit of ego, where it's like you must stay with this particular saying, as opposed to, I can give you everything else, but not the saying. That's not enough. I think that's insane. I also think it's insane on the premise that people accept that there must be police, meaning any society will have some level of cops. I fundamentally reject that. Would there be some, I don't know, patrol or something? I suppose. But I would make the point that the reason that the cops are there has to do with the inequality, the need to protect the state, and the need to be able to basically allow rich people to keep their riches. If you had a society that was equitable, your need for cops would probably vanish. I mean, that's a side point. I'm sorry, that's a side point. Look, the way you break the edifice, honestly, is by being out the political system. There's no magic to it. That's what I mean. Does that risk Trump winning? Yes, it does. But the question and the problem is that as you move forward, and as they get more brazen in realizing that you would vote for literally anybody. Sam Cedar said he would vote for one less concentration camp. And think about what that means for the moment. Let's say for the moment, one party, Democrats, was building one concentration camp. And let's say the Republican Party was building two. It's 2020. The next year, the Democrat is now building 4 concentration camps. The Republican is building 2. Or let's say the Republican is building 6. Cedar, under that argument, would vote for the Democrat again, despite the fact that the number of concentration camps has gone up by 3. Another 4 years, Democrat, 10. Republican, 11. Cedar, 1 less concentration camp. And yet, we're now up to 10 concentration camps. I'm trying to make the very basic point that as you move in this process, your decision space gets that much more constrained, where the person gets worse and worse and worse until you finally get to the point of a Trump and a Joe Biden, and you're in this thing of, fuck, I'm stuck. You're not stuck. It is an incentive based on how bad Trump is, but that's just an incentive. You do have a choice. Now, that choice, like all things in God's wrath, come with consequence. But the question becomes, at which point is there a day of reckoning? And under this model where you're continuing to just vote for the worst, you never get the opportunity to get somebody that is decent, because you've always accepted the premise that you'll vote for anybody they give you. When does this stop? At some point, there has to be a day of reckoning where this breaks. I would say, let this be it. You're galvanized by the millions of people you have in the streets. Those millions of people in the streets, if they operated with a political identity, can have a clear, I guess you could say, fight on this front. I mean, right now, the argument is defund the police. And Joe Biden has basically said kick rocks. Nancy Pelosi has said kick rocks. Donald Trump has said kick rocks. The entire political edifice has said kick rocks. You have 40 million people without a job. I mean, God damn it, put this in perspective. You have 40 million people out of a job. 110,000 people dead. Blacks, the people who vote Democrat, like 91%. 3 to 1. More likely to be part of the people who are going to be evicted. More likely to be the people who die of COVID-19. More likely to be on the lower end of the economic scale before the pandemic, which many of those jobs were eliminated on a whim after the pandemic, with no assistance coming in the next few months. This is your world. This is not their fault. They did everything right. If my mom was working, she would be in a situation where she was making, $17,000 a year, lose the job. There's no savings. $1,200 may pay rent one month. What do you do? And that's the situation that many Americans are confronted with. What we say is the poverty level is woefully inadequate to even describe any level of living, let alone to call it poverty. That is so far below poverty. It's an understatement. It shocks the conscious understatement. And we have these people in these horrible situations. Again, no fault of their own, with a political instrument that didn't care. This is the root of my angst on this. Why I say, what do you want to kill God? Because this needs to stop. It's not so much that I want Trump to get elected. Lord knows I don't want Trump to get elected. But I got to be honest, I don't want Joe Biden to get elected either. And I know someone would say, well, dude, it's one or the other. Yes. But abstaining from this is a choice. And it's a rational choice, given this circumstance. I would say this. If at some point this has to break, would it be better to do it with 1 million people in the streets? Your political instrument has basically told you to fuck off. And with 40, 50 years behind it of basically accepting blue no matter who, you've basically allowed the Democratic Party to put in hacks where you don't necessarily have any power one way or the other over what those hacks do. And those hacks know it. Those hacks know that you have two choices, Republican or Democrat. So they can be horrible, but least worst horrible. And use that as a political strategy to take all sorts of cash and to basically not do any level of lefty priorities, despite the fact that lefties are so terrified of Republicans, they're cowed into voting for these creatures. At which point do you get your progressive priorities passed? And can you get those progressive priorities passed with a Democratic Party that is just as hostile to those priorities as a Republican Party? And if both are hostile, why are you voting for the Democrat when it is amply clear they're not going to back your priorities? And in fact, knowing that you're so terrified of them, they basically don't have to give you anything. You have nowhere else to go. Do you know how berating that is? But that is what is fundamentally being said with the Joe Biden presidency. You have nowhere else to go. That is what is said. And think about what that has done. Your political class, from the standpoint of the Democratic Party, gave you bupkis. Trump said, I'm going to give $1,200, and they were like, whoa, I don't know about that. And then quibbled over people getting a few $100 extra. Nancy Pelosi is a fucking 100 millionaire. I find it offensive that they would stand up there and basically not represent the interests of the public. What is the purpose of the government if it's not to do that? The government has fundamentally discredited itself. And yet there it is. It will stand there and basically demand allegiance, despite the fact that it doesn't represent the interests of the public. This is the most stark thing that I'm bothered by more than anything else. Even more than, believe it or not, Trump getting elected again. Your political space has just stopped representing you. And it's naked about it. We want Medicare for all, 88%. Yeah, we don't care. Hey, we have a lot of people who are going to face evictions. Yeah, we don't care about that either. Hey, this guy died. Okay, we'll take a knee. But no, that Defund the Police stuff. You have millions of people in the streets. This is the moment for big ideas. And none are there to be found. The public is making a demand. The political system doesn't care. At which point do we regain control of our political system? Or is this just one of those things where we just accept that our political device no longer pays attention or is even connected to what the public wants and is entire appendage, basically, of the rich? This is atrocious and it needs to stop. And I'm making the point that you have so many people in the streets right now that many of those people, if they can develop a political identity, can at the very least continue a coherent demand with action against, meaning a consequence. Something that can't necessarily be done without that. Those people potentially have pulled away from the political space with this notion of, do you accept defund the police or not? And if not, what? Are you just going to scream at them? Or are you going to say, we will go against you in a way of saying, we don't support you. We want you to lose. Meaning making a statement about it. Having people out front gives the ability to have a coherent, large numbers of mass people having threat to the political device. The reason that they're trying to appease all of these people with kneeing and everything else is because they want to get that energy back into the political device where it can be dissipated and basically stifled. Those people who are out there, to some degree, know that. Now the catch becomes, can they push all of this into something that's politically coherent to get what they want? That's the question. That's the interesting question. But my fear, and the thing that I am more bothered by, is the complete and grotesque inattentiveness of the political instrument to its populace. And what does that mean when that populace gets fed up with that? Will the weapons of that political device that doesn't no longer care about the public be used against the public? We've seen a little bit of that with Trump, especially with him talking about bringing in the military. But the public is righteously indignant. 40 million people are out of a job. The government did dick about it. I'm sorry. Tiny dick about it. Tiny dick about it. Yeah, I'll leave this here. I honestly don't want to belabor the point. It angers me, though. But the only way to break this is to not participate in this. And I know that's stark, but there are consequences. We've gone for like 40, 50 years without doing anything about this issue. And now, at some point, when it's time to clean it up, like any dirty room, there's a certain degree of pain in doing so. The pain, I don't take lightly, honestly. But I have no idea of another way of changing this dynamic. If you had to get anything done from the standpoint of lefty priorities, and you want to use some device like the Democratic Party, you can't use it in the way that it is. And the way that it is now, it doesn't even care what you want. It doesn't care what the public wants. Trump is completely detached. That should be terrifying to you, and terrifying in profound ways. What does it mean? Consider for the moment that our responsibility, philosophically, is to be good stewards and citizens of the government. Multiple things. All of those things are self-imagination for some degree, but at least from the standpoint of under the Constitution or under the thing of to which we organize around, the myths to which we organize around. Good stewards, good citizens. Part of that is a responsibility to have some level of control of your government. It is vastly important that you do. I mean, keep in mind, when you're voting and putting people in office and the agitation and the activism and those type of things, that stuff is done with the notion that there are things that your society needs to function. And within the context of those things, you have a government that can supply those things to the people. Meaning, the government is there literally to provide general welfare. If nothing else, that. And it failed in that one task monstrously to the demise of many. 30 million people didn't get that check. And again, there are plenty of people who had no savings and bam. It needs to be understood that not only did the government fail, it didn't care that it failed. In fact, to make it worse, just lied about it. Now, you could say, okay, well, if you had a Democrat, they wouldn't do that. I hate to tell you this again. Voting for a Democrat is not going to get you out of this. Joe Biden lies flagrantly. He is still lying about being part of the civil rights movement. Now, you can say, well, those are different lies. But he had... I mean, we're quibbling about the level of lying within the context of candidates. And, you know, whether people realize it or not, that kind of makes my point. At which point is there a reckoning where you realize that this is a scam, and the only way to end the scam is to not participate in the scam? Come what may, as bad as that sounds. But there's no other way out of this. Yes, those people in the streets give you an inflection point. Because at the very least, under normal circumstances, the voice of the masses is just silent. They win or lose, but the public itself barely gets any voice in this process. But the protest is different. Now the catch is the media is moving their attention to something else. But it gives you an inflection point where you can politically make a coherent demand, which defund the police, fair enough. But on top of that coherent demand, press that case. But there needs to be a consequence. But at the very least, having so many millions out in the public, you may be able to get all of those people on the same page to give a yay or nay in regards to a candidate, with the threat being enough to compel change. Otherwise, I have no other idea to get through it other than to break it by not participating. Kill God, but stop believing in it. That's where I'm at. You kill God by stop believing in God. Yeah, there's consequences. I don't shirk that. Zach Boyles. Jesse Ventura latest interviews on Jimmy Dore look promising. Have you checked him out at all? Look at 50% chance that he'll be running. I haven't checked out Dore in a while. I don't entirely get the opportunity to check out other shows anymore. Outside of, I'm always reading for news stuff for this show. I would have loved Jesse Ventura to run as a Green Party member. He didn't run. He chose not to. He said, if you want to elect me, you're going to have to be willing to elect Jay Guevara. The problem is always getting on the debate stage. If you can get on the debate stage, you can give a public an alternate viewpoint. Jesse Ventura was a governor, so at the very least he has the stature of saying, yes, I won in this particular capacity. I was in the political space. I was the governor of a particular state. So in and of itself, that looks good. There's always a thing with the Green Party because it comes across as if it's an entirely environmental party, despite the fact that they have a litany of policies that go beyond the environmental front. This is why it's so important in regards to the naming. Defund the Police is provocative just for the sake of provocatives. Ego, I'm sorry, it just is. And you can craft that in a way that is less provocative, that gets you exactly what you want for this moment. So instead of arguing about this word and having to explain this word, you could have been dealing with issues of actual poverty and the reason those cops were there. Those are different conversations. The American public understands poverty. They may agree with you on the poverty stuff. They may even agree with programs. They may even agree with ideas on, all right, how do we deal with this? With policing being a part of that. I guess my point is you could have gotten what you wanted without necessarily having to go with the provocative thing of people needing to understand what you mean by it. But nevertheless, my comrades decided to fight on this front, so I will fight on this front with them. Words are important, that's all. It's just, sometimes you get into your head that people need to do X or they need to do Y. And there's this other weird thing about defund the police that people immediately believe you think you're trying to abolish the police. And it's like, no, they're not trying to abolish the police. It's like the framing of it. It's so mangled, which allows basically the person to be attacked easier than otherwise would be necessary. The reason why all of these other candidates look at this phrase as being radioactive is because the fact of the matter is the majority of the public is not necessarily against the police. You must understand the majority of the public is white. Whites hold the majority of the wealth. 178,000 to 18,000. That's the wealth gap between these two. That wealth gap hasn't gotten any better. In fact, that wealth gap has just gotten worse because money builds on itself. So you basically had slaves. Those slaves got out of slavery, had nothing to their name, cobbled themselves together a life, and you basically have a permanent underclass because of it, without anything being done about it. That's your life. That's your world, right? That's basically what we're left with. I mean, I started to focus more on poverty, I think. I think when I first started my show, actually, I was in this camp of Jack Fresco, this notion of getting rid of cash. And then as I thought about it, I was like, that's pretty heavily ideological when you think about it. It's possible. And you think about from where we are now, it almost seems like, oh, that's an impossible task. But I would imagine you wouldn't necessarily get to that in one leap. It would be one step after the next. Even in Star Trek, it was just kind of one step after the next. But I think I've gotten into this mindset of, at least from the standpoint of incremental moves, I don't get, like, poverty, meaning dealing with poverty. Because many of the problems, especially when we're talking about cops or whatever, it doesn't happen in thriving communities. We accept, as a society, an underclass. That's atrocious. And then we complain about crime, and we're shocked as shit. It's like, oh, look at all that crime. Why? And do you want to do something about that? Now, I don't necessarily think doing something about that is entirely easy, but easy doesn't necessarily matter. The question becomes, do you want to do something about it? I mean, going to the moon wasn't easy, but we did it. Are we an evolved society or not? And I know people scream no. But can we do better? The answer is yes. And what part and parcel to be doing better is taking policies that would ameliorate some of these rough edges. That answer would be yes. With 40 million people out of a job, with 100,000 dead, 2 million with the infection, again, the stupidity of the government itself, with all of this going on, the rental apocalypse, where all of these people are going to lose their homes, let alone the people who already lost their homes. Is it possible, to any degree that's possible, that maybe what's required is a plan that is grand, that is big, that is expansive, where the public can latch onto and says, yes, that's what we want. You have all of those people in the streets there screaming for it. And I made this point, like the arc of history doesn't necessarily bend by itself. It's not just this thing that, happens. It takes moments like this, where all of these people will come out and say, do something big. And again, your political instrument doesn't care. Look, we may disagree on the Trump-Biden stuff, but I would say that that is a major, major issue, and that should be terrifying. You have a philosophical responsibility to have control of your government. And what does it mean when you don't have control of that government? Well, that government basically has control of you. I mean, that's a terrifying reality when the public wants and needs and the government doesn't care. Neither party in this sense. You have fame from one and you have just disdain from the other. And the public stands there like, just go about their way doing their jobs. I'm surprised there haven't been more people in the streets, if we're being honest. 95% of the income gains to the top 1%. Like, share,